he sentenced him to 20 years in prison. The judge had even asked my mother and I if we thought that Liam should have leniency and should be shown mercy. I can still remember my mother sneering.
No, Your Honor. That monster is no longer my son. He deserves no compassion at all.
Her voice dripped with venom, and I felt pride in knowing that she had finally seen the truth. After that, Liam was hauled away to prison in a wheelchair. Hi, my name is Jamie, and I always knew I was the outcast in my own family. My older brother Liam was the star, the favorite, who could do no wrong in the eyes of my parents. He was 3 years older than me, tall, athletic, and charming, the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately capture everyone's attention. He was perfect in their eyes, but to me, he was spoiled and arrogant, a tyrant who ruled our house. Mom and Dad never saw how Liam treated me, the way he belittled me when no one else was around, or how he would manipulate situations to make himself look good while making me seem like the screw-up. It was always my fault, even when it wasn't. Why can't you be more like Liam? Would you please stop saying that every day? I'm trying my best, Dad. You know that he isn't actually perfect. Well, his good grades and all his trophies say otherwise. My parents would say such things often, usually after Liam had convinced them that I was to blame for something that had gone wrong, something that he usually had done. Sadly, they believed him over me.
Liam wouldn't act like this, Jamie. Why do you always have to be so difficult?
I'd stopped fighting back years ago. After all, what was the point? No matter what I did, it was never good enough. Liam was the golden child, and I was the failure. That's just how it was. I remember one afternoon, about a year ago, when everything started to unravel. Liam had just gotten his driver's license, and Dad had bought him a brand new car. Not just any car either, a sleek black sports car that Liam had been begging for. I was 16 at the time, and barely able to ride my old bike without getting side eyes from Dad for not looking like a man. But Liam? He got everything handed to him. Let's go for a drive, Jamie. Come on, you'll like it. I didn't want to go. The last thing I wanted was to spend more time with him, but refusing would have meant more trouble for me later. So, I got in the car. We drove through town, Liam showing off, speeding down narrow streets while blasting the stereo. I held onto the seat, my knuckles white, my stomach churning. Relax, Jamie. You're such a baby. Just enjoy the ride. I didn't say anything, just stared out the window and wished I was anywhere else. That was the way it always was with Liam. He got to have fun, and I was left in his shadow, just trying to stay out of the way. Later that evening, though things took a real turn for the worst. We were sitting at the dinner table, Mom, Dad, Liam, and I. It was supposed to be a regular family dinner, but somehow it always turned into a showcase of Liam's accomplishments.
Did you hear? Liam got an A on his physics exam. His teacher says he's one of the brightest students she's ever had.
That's my boy, always making us proud. You'll be going places, Liam, I know it. I forced myself to chew the dry chicken on my plate, staring at the tablecloth to avoid their eyes.
What about you, Jamie? Are you even trying in school?
I'm doing fine. Fine isn't good enough. You're wasting your potential. You could learn a thing or two from Liam. Liam smirked across the table, and I knew he was enjoying every second of it. But then things took a turn, as they sometimes did when Liam got bored. He liked to push things just far enough to get a reaction. Actually, Dad, Jamie's not doing so well in school. I heard he's been skipping classes.
What? Is that true?
I shook my head, trying to defend myself, but Liam kept going. Yeah, one of his teachers mentioned it to me. Said he's been falling behind. Dad slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes rattle. Damn it, Jamie. You're going to ruin your life. Do you think we'll let you sit around and do nothing while Liam is out there making something of himself? I haven't been skipping classes, I swear. Of course, they didn't believe me, and they spent the next few hours yelling at me. Liam was smiling the entire time, clearly enjoying the trauma he was causing me. I was so done with my parents, but with what happened later, I regret not trying harder to get them to see me as anything but a screw-up. There wasn't much that Liam couldn't pass off onto me. There was even the time that our mother found drugs in Liam's room, and he somehow convinced them that they were mine.
Liam, sweetie, what are these doing here?
Mom, those aren't mine. They must be Jamie's. I don't know why he would hide them in my room.
Jamie! I wish I could say that I was surprised by this. Just wait till your father gets home. You are in big trouble.
Are you kidding me? They aren't mine. They are literally in Liam's room, hidden in his dresser. Why on earth are you believing him? But that's how it always went. After that, I wasn't allowed to leave the house for months except to go to school. Eventually, though, things got back to normal. Or at least, the terrible kind of normal that my family was capable of. Then it happened. The night that changed everything. It was supposed to be a quiet evening. Mom and Dad were going out for dinner, leaving Liam and me at home. I was in my room, trying to avoid Liam as usual, when I heard him knocking on the door. Jamie, I need a favor. What? What could you possibly want from me? I need you to distract Mom and Dad for me when they get home. Why? Because I'm bored, and I want to go for a joyride. They told you not to drive it tonight and to stay home with me. They think I'll get up to no good if you aren't here since you convinced them that I'm the screw-up. I know, genius. That's why I need you to cover for me. Just tell them I was here the whole time. I'll be back before they even know it. No way. I'm not lying for you. Liam's expression darkened, and he raised his fists at me in a threatening manner. Don't be such a little rat, Jamie. You owe me. You know they'll blame you for something sooner or later. If you help me out like this, then I'll get them to go easy on you. You do me a favor, and I'll do one for you. I knew he was lying. There was no way that he would ever come to my aid, but I also knew that he was going to do whatever he wanted to, whether I agreed or not. And so, I shrugged and just turned on the television and started watching a movie. The next part is still a blur to me, even now. Liam took the car, speeding off into the night. After some time, our mom came home earlier than expected, and within minutes, the phone rang. I heard my mother's voice, high-pitched and panicked.
What? No, that can't be right. He's supposed to be at home. He wouldn't...
Then she came rushing upstairs and demanded I tell her where Liam was. I refused to lie for him, so I told her that he had left and went for a joyride. She screamed at the top of her lungs in pain, and then told me that both Liam and our father had been in an accident. Apparently, our father was on his way home as well, when Liam ran through a stop sign and slammed into him, causing both their cars to roll hundreds of feet down the road. Paramedics arrived as quickly as they could, but our father was too badly injured, and he died before they could help him. Liam was much luckier, and while he lost both of his legs, he survived the crash. My mother was enraged, and she refused to speak to Liam when she went to see him in the hospital. Minutes after we arrived, some police came in and informed my mom that drugs had been found in Liam's system, and that they felt that the accident was in large part to him being impaired and driving dangerously. My mother then looked at Liam, and then at me. It was the first time that she truly apologized to me. It felt like such a relief that she had finally realized the truth about Liam and I, and she swore that she would never take Liam's word over mine ever again. For weeks after the funeral, I stayed quiet. Liam was still in the hospital, facing charges for reckless driving and vehicular manslaughter, on top of possession of an illegal substance. Neither my mother or I went to visit him even once. As far as she was concerned, he was dead to her as well. But I couldn't stop thinking about that night. How it was all Liam's fault. How his selfishness, his arrogance, had cost us everything. And then I found it. His belongings were delivered to the house, and among them, I found his phone. On it was a text from the night of the accident. He had messaged one of his friends, joking about how fast he was going and how stupid our parents were for buying him such a powerful car. Liam had even messaged that he was going to play chicken with an oncoming car. I had heard him mention this game of his before. He would drive towards an oncoming car and force them to swerve off the road, or have a head-on collision with him. I could only assume that it was the drugs that made him so bold and careless. Of course, this meant that it wasn't exactly an accident. He had endangered our father's life on purpose. The crash, the death, all of it. It was because Liam had been selfish and just plain reckless. I showed my mother the messages, and together we went to the police and showed them everything. With this new information, they built an airtight case against Liam, and as soon as he was released from the hospital, he went straight to jail where he waited until his trial date. The judge saw the messages, and along with the knowledge that Liam was high at the time as well, he sentenced him to 20 years in prison. The judge had even asked my mother and I if we thought that Liam should have leniency and should be shown mercy. I can still remember my mother sneering.
No, Your Honor. That monster is no longer my son. He deserves no compassion at all.
Her voice dripped with venom, and I felt pride in knowing that she had finally seen the truth. After that, Liam was hauled away to prison in a wheelchair. He would write us letters fairly often, but we wouldn't even read them, and we never visited him once. The only good news I do have is that after the whole ordeal, that my mother and I grew very close. She finally saw me for the good, well-rounded boy that I was, and that she had been blinded by Liam into seeing me as something I wasn't. It's a shame that it took such a terrible event for us to finally grow close, but I am very grateful for it. Although if I could go back in time, I would happily trade Liam's life for my father's. And no amount of time in prison can ever undo the horrible mistake that he made. I once heard that my father's ghost tormented Liam in prison. I hope that is true. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe.
Before I could process her words, she pulled the trigger, but luckily for me. Her aim was terrible, and she missed. My instincts took over, and I fired a single shot, hitting her in the shoulder and knocking the gun out of her hands. She screamed, clutching shoulder with the opposite hand. My father dropped the bag of money and drew a knife and then charged towards me. Before he got more than 2 feet, I shot him in the leg, which made him stumble and lose his balance. I then drew my baton and swung it at him, striking him across the chest, sending him stumbling backward. I hit him 2 more times, though, to incapacitate him, though. The next few moments were a blur of chaos. Backup arrived, and before I knew it, my parents were in handcuffs, being led out of the store. My heart was racing, my mind spinning. I had just arrested my own parents. I can still remember the suffocating darkness of that house. The walls always felt like they were closing in, trapping me in a prison I couldn't escape. My name is Clara, and the story of my childhood is one I spent years trying to forget, only for it to come crashing back in a way I never imagined. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. Growing up, my parents, if you could even call them that, weren't the kind of people you would expect to have children. They treated me less like their daughter, and more like a burden or an inconvenience. My father, Derek, was a towering man, not just in stature, but in the way he carried himself. His presence filled every room with a smothering tension, and his words cut sharper than any knife. My mother, Diane, was no better. She had this eerie calmness about her, like a snake waiting to strike, her cruelty always simmering just beneath the surface. From what I later learned from their insults, they never wanted a girl. Additionally, on the day I was born, my parents' cars were stolen, so I was seen as bad luck from that moment on. Most days, it was the small things they used to break me down, chip away at any sense of worth I might have had. My father would walk into the kitchen, glance at me, and scoff.
Look at you. You're pathetic, Clara. Useless. What do you even do around here?
I'd lower my head, stare at my hands, and mutter or cry, anything to make me seem smaller and less like a target. I'm sorry.
Speak up when I'm talking to you.
I'm sorry, Dad. Did I do something wrong?
Yeah, you were born.
It was kind of a messed up thing to say to a kid, but he didn't care. Nothing I said or did ever mattered to either him or my mom. My mother would watch from the corner, a smirk playing at her lips as if she enjoyed seeing him tear me apart. Sometimes she'd add her own venom.
Don't bother apologizing, Clara. You'll never be good enough for anything. You're just like a stain we can't wash out.
I'd spend nights locked in my room, clutching my pillow so hard I thought it would tear, trying to smother the sound of my crying. They wouldn't care if they heard me. They never did. Every day of my life was like that. They would constantly bounce between ignoring me or outright verbally abusing me. There were even times that they would lock me out of the house and make me sleep in the backyard. It wasn't like they would give me a sleeping bag or a tent. Nope. All I had was the grass for a bed, and it didn't matter if it was raining or snowing. I would have to figure out a way to try to stay dry. As a result, I was always sick and underweight. On the days they would lock me out, I wouldn't have a thing to eat unless I was able to find something. I would go through our neighbors' garbages looking for scraps of food, or I would go to the woods near our home and try to find berries to eat. The amount of times that I ate berries that made me sick was not a small number, but I was starving and had no other choice. When I turned 16, something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the accumulation of years of abuse, or maybe it was just that I had finally reached my limit. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. I couldn't let them destroy what little was left of me. The night I ran away was cold. I packed what little I had, a few clothes, some money I'd saved from odd jobs, and some food that I stole from the pantry. Sneaking out of the house wasn't difficult. My parents never paid much attention to me unless they were yelling at me. The old front door creaked as I opened it, and my father heard it and came to see what the noise was.
Where do you think you're going?
Anywhere but here.
Oh? You've chosen to run away then?
Yeah, living on the streets would be better than living here with you monsters.
Good. That will save us some money since we won't have to feed your worthless ass. I hope you die out there.
His words cut me one last time, but it was just the push I needed to rush out of that house. I started walking, not knowing exactly where I was going, but certain that anywhere would be better than the home I had just left behind. The next few years weren't easy. I slept on friends' couches, in shelters, sometimes on the streets. But it didn't matter. I was free. Every day was a struggle, but it was my struggle. I worked whatever jobs I could find, waitressing, cleaning, anything to get by. And I went to school, determined to make something of myself, to prove to myself that I was worth more than the garbage my parents had always said I was. It took time, but I eventually earned enough to apply to the police academy. I don't know what drew me to law enforcement exactly. Maybe it was the idea of being able to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. The years passed, and I grew stronger into someone I barely recognized. A woman who could hold her head high and face the world without flinching. I graduated from the academy and became a police officer. I was so proud of myself and how much I had grown. But no matter how far I'd come, the past had a way of finding me. One night, when I was responding to call about a robbery in progress, I was the first on the scene, the adrenaline pumping through my veins as I pulled up to the small convenience store. I grabbed my gun, approached the entrance cautiously, and stepped inside. The moment I saw them, I froze. My heart dropped into my stomach as I saw my parents. My mother was standing at the counter, her hands trembling as she pointed a gun at the terrified cashier. My father was rifling through the register, stuffing cash into a bag. He appeared to be unarmed. I had heard them mention that they would from time to time steal in order to get by, but I never knew that they would rob a store. I had to assume that times were hard for them. Drop the weapon. My mother turned, her eyes widening as she saw me. I wasn't sure if she recognized me or not. After all, it had been several years since they had last seen me.
Get out of here or you'll regret it.
Mom, it's over. Put the gun down.
Don't call me that. You're nothing to me.
Yeah, and I know that I never was more than a burden in your eyes, but I'm a police officer now. It's my duty to enforce the law and protect people like this man you are robbing. So put down your weapons and let's talk this out.
Of course it's you, the little rat we let live. How ironic.
He didn't even seem to care that I was pointing a gun at him. Even now, he viewed me as just insignificant, and he just assumed that I wouldn't have the courage to arrest them, let alone pull the trigger. I took a deep breath, fighting the storm of emotions surging inside me. Put the money down, Dad. This doesn't have to get worse.
Clara, you think you're better than us now, don't you? With your badge and your gun, you're still that worthless little girl. That dirty little animal that would sleep in the dirt where you belonged.
This isn't about us. Now put your weapons down. This doesn't have to escalate. There was a moment of silence. My mother glanced at my father, then back at me. I saw her finger twitch on the trigger, and I knew I had to act before things spiraled further out of control. I'm not asking again. Drop the weapon. Now. For a moment, I thought she might comply, but then her lips curled into a cruel smile. She hadn't changed over the years and was still just as vicious.
You'll always be nothing, Clara.
Before I could process her words, she pulled the trigger, but luckily for me. Her aim was terrible, and she missed. My instincts took over, and I fired a single shot, hitting her in the shoulder and knocking the gun out of her hands. She screamed, clutching shoulder with the opposite hand. My father dropped the bag of money and drew a knife and then charged towards me. Before he got more than 2 feet, I shot him in the leg, which made him stumble and lose his balance. I then drew my baton and swung it at him, striking him across the chest, sending him stumbling backward. I hit him 2 more times, though, to incapacitate him, though. The next few moments were a blur of chaos. Backup arrived, and before I knew it, my parents were in handcuffs, being led out of the store. My heart was racing, my mind spinning. I had just arrested my own parents. Both of them were taken to the hospital where they were treated for their wounds, and after they were patched up, they were released into our custody. We put them into the back of a police van. The ride back to the station was silent. I sat across from them in the back of the police van, watching their faces, waiting for something, anything, that would explain what had just happened. But they didn't speak. As they were processed, I stood by, watching as they were led into separate holding cells. My father glanced at me one last time before disappearing behind the bars, but there was no emotion in his eyes, no remorse, no regret. Just the same cold, empty hatred I had seen all my life. I waited until my fellow officers walked away, and then I approached his cell. It's funny that you always told me that I would amount to nothing and that I was worthless, but now look at us. I've made something of myself. I help people every day. I have friends and a good life, and you. You're just some 2-bit crook that is going to spend a lot of time behind bars.
You think because you became a cop that makes you special?
Yes, it does. Because I was able to grow strong and proud of myself and become a hero, in spite of being raised by 2 of the dumbest villains on Earth. Oh, and just so you know, I chose to not shoot you both in the head. The fact that Mom fired first gave me the right to use lethal force. Just keep that in mind. As I walked away, I saw my father's eyes widen as he realized what I had just told him. He and my mother were only alive right now because I had chosen not to shoot to kill. That fact clearly rattled him to his core. Sitting in the station after it was all over, I couldn't help but think about the irony of it all. I had spent my entire life running from them, trying to escape the damage they had done, only to end up here. My parents were later charged with robbery and sentenced to 15 years in prison. All of their property was seized, and the family cut ties with them. By the time they are released, they will both be quite old and broke. There was a sense of closure in it. They no longer had any power over me. I was no longer that scared, broken girl hiding in her room, waiting for the next insult or slap. I was stronger now, stronger than they could ever be. And as I left the station that night, the weight of my past finally began to lift. I wasn't running anymore. I was standing still, grounded, and for the first time in my life, I was free. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment, asking her to let us go to a hospital and stop whatever it was that she was doing. Her response was completely unexpected.
I'm sorry, honey, but you can't leave. If you go to the hospital, they're going to know that I've been slowly poisoning you both. I need you both to die.
I couldn't believe my ears. My dad looked pale himself.
Why? Why are you doing this?
I heard you, idiot. I heard you telling your lawyer to give all your properties to this stupid child of yours. What about Sasha and I? What do we get? What are you gonna get if you kill us, Steph? You're a good person. Don't let greed control you, please.
Oh, darling. I was never a good person. I came in here with the sole purpose of inheriting your dad's company after his death. Him willing everything to you just made me strike earlier than planned.
We were hurt and felt betrayed. Hi there, my name's Abby, and I managed to escape being killed by my stepmom and her daughter. I know you're curious as to how they wanted to kill me and how I managed to escape. I'll tell you. But first, a little backstory. I lost my mom around age 16. At first, it was just a mild back pain and headaches, until she began passing out constantly. She'd assured us that she was fine.
It's just stress. I'll take a few days off until I'm better.
We all believed her. My mother worked very hard with my dad to keep the company going. She was allowed to rest as much as she wanted. My grandparents ensured to take care of her, and I did the same whenever I was home. However, there was no progress even after 3 weeks. A month later, and my mom was suddenly paralyzed. She was immediately rushed to the hospital where she was diagnosed with a brain tumor. My dad was broken, my grandparents devastated, and I couldn't even point out what I was feeling. She needed immediate surgery according to the doctor. My dad didn't delay. Everything happened so fast. Before I knew it, I was holding my mom's hand in tears as they wheeled her to the theater room. None of us could sleep throughout the hours the surgery took. All we wanted to hear was good news, but the universe had a different plan for us. And the doctors finally walked out of the theater room with sad faces and informed us that the surgery had gone well, but my mom didn't make it out alive. We all broke into tears. I felt my world crumble as I watched my grandmother faint, and my dad and grandfather shaking as they cried. It was the saddest day of my life. Well, we buried her a few days later and mourned for years. I felt so bad for my dad. He rarely spoke anymore and only focused on work and ensuring that I and my grandparents were doing well. Oftentimes, I would see him in the living room, crying when he thought everyone was asleep. Even after 4 years, he still missed his wife so much. I wanted him to be fine. I wanted him to feel loved, the way my mom would have loved him if she were still alive. So I advised him to find another woman. At first, he thought I was crazy and didn't know what I was saying. But soon, after I talked to him so many more times, he realized I was right. He needed company. He introduced Steph to the family 1 year after. I encouraged him to move on. Steph was a young, stunning woman and seemed kind. My dad had brought her home and she prepared dinner for the family. She had a beautiful smile and was super kind to my grandparents. I could see how she handled them with care. I guess it was her plan to gain our trust. She did succeed. After visiting twice more, she'd gotten our hearts. We saw her as a lovable person and supported her relationship with my dad. About 3 months later, we were introduced to her daughter, Sasha. Steph had cried after we accepted her daughter. According to her, she'd thought we would hate her for it. She was so pitiful that we were all fooled. 2 months after she introduced Sasha to us, Steph and my dad got married. I was particularly excited because of Sasha. She was only 2 years older than me, so I felt we could be best friends. However, she didn't seem like who was a talker. She often kept to herself and only smiled and gave few words when spoken to. I soon concluded that we couldn't be what I had envisioned, but we were still cool. I was still in college when Steph and my dad got married. She and her daughter officially moved into our house in the day of the wedding. It felt good having more people. My dad had wanted Steph to be a full-time housewife so she could look after his parents, but she disagreed. I knew because I overheard them discussing it 2 nights after their wedding.
I never told you I wanted to stay home. I want to work with you. I want to help in the company. You know how much I love to work.
I reasoned with her. It wasn't going to be fun being home all day. We had 2 maids who looked after my grandparents. I thought it was enough. Before stepping away, I heard my dad agree with her. Steph joined the company as the vice president. I didn't like it at first, seeing that it was the position which my mom had occupied when she was alive. But I reminded myself that she was gone and Steph was married to my dad now. Everything was going smoothly until 2 years later, when I finished college. I was 23 then. Steph was still her good self, and her daughter was barely home. She worked as a flight attendant. After graduation, I was ready to join my dad's company. He'd always told me to prepare for when I'll join. I was happy that it was finally time. However, Steph seemed to have other plans.
Abby doesn't have any working experience. I don't think it's advisable to bring her in just yet. Let her get a job somewhere else and she can come in.
But the position I prepared for her is vacant.
Well, Sasha can be there until Abby is ready. She quit her job yesterday and is currently jobless.
I'd thought it was absurd at first, but Steph had managed to convince me that it was better to have experience first, so I'd be able to manage the whole company someday. Of course, I'd accepted. The woman had a very sweet way of being manipulative, but I wasn't aware yet. Neither was my dad. A month later, I suddenly fell sick at the same time my dad did. We were both having serious abdominal pain that felt like it was going to claim our lives. We wanted to go to the hospital, but Steph refused.
I'll just bring my personal doctor to check you both.
We agreed. In fact, we were grateful to her. During the days we had to be treated at home, she did well handling the company and also finding time to help us. That made me love and trust her even more. We got better and went back to our lives. However, the abdominal pain returned after 2 months. It was worse than the first. Again, Steph brought her doctor to treat us. It stopped, but came back again after another 2 months. The pain was nearly unbearable. We badly wanted to go to the hospital, but Steph refused. We couldn't argue. We were too weak to argue. Our treatment lasted longer than the previous ones. Our recovery was also slow.
I think you both need to stop working for now. Sasha and I will handle the company and any other thing. I need you both to stay at home until you're better.
We agreed that she was right. We couldn't work in such condition. My dad wasn't worried about leaving the company in her care. She was doing a good job anyway. We stayed at home, hoping to be better in a few weeks. Unfortunately, whenever we felt better and ready to return to work, the pain would return again. After 3 months, my dad and I had become lean. We'd also become weak that we needed to use wheelchairs for movement. My grandparents advised us to visit a hospital, but we couldn't. Not after Steph assured us that her doctor knew what he was doing. When we only got worse, I told my dad that we needed to visit a hospital. When we told Steph, she flared up.
Why can't you listen to me, you idiots? You're going to no hospital, got it?
I was shocked at her words. What even shocked me more was when she seized everyone's phones, including the maids, and threatened us with a gun. She also began locking us in whenever she and Sasha left for work. We immediately knew something was wrong and we needed to seek help. We had no means of communication or escape. My dad confronted her one night, asking her to let us go to a hospital and stop whatever it was that she was doing. Her response was completely unexpected.
I'm sorry, honey, but you can't leave. If you go to the hospital, they're going to know that I've been slowly poisoning you both. I need you both to die.
I couldn't believe my ears. My dad looked pale himself.
Why? Why are you doing this?
I heard you, idiot. I heard you telling your lawyer to give all your properties to this stupid child of yours. What about Sasha and I? What do we get? What are you gonna get if you kill us, Steph? You're a good person. Don't let greed control you, please.
Oh, darling, I was never a good person. I came in here with the sole purpose of inheriting your dad's company after his death. Him willing everything to you just made me strike earlier than planned.
We were hurt and felt betrayed. The doctor stopped coming to treat us. We were hopeless, and no one was allowed to leave the house. We were all locked up inside. Well, until one of the maids revealed that she had a second phone, which Steph didn't know about.
You've all been good to me. I can't watch Mrs. Steph kill you all.
We were grateful. Immediately, I called my aunt who lived nearby. I explained everything to her and asked her to come to the house with police when Sasha and Steph were home. Once we made our plans, I returned the phone to the maid, and she hid it again. Mother and daughter returned home, but we pretended like nothing had happened. Later that night, while they were both upstairs in Sasha's room, my aunt and the police burst into the house. Luckily, the police had came without the noise of their sirens, and the security guard had let them in as he saw my aunt. Steph and her mother jumped out through Sasha's window as they heard the police. Immediately, they chased the two women. According to the police, they both ran so fast and had to be shot in their legs to stop them. While both of them were taken to the station, my dad and I received treatment in the hospital. According to the doctor, the poison had ate deep into us. One more strike from Steph and we could have died. We spent a month at the hospital before getting discharged. During that 1 month, Steph and her daughter were charged with attempted murder by poisoning. They also had to face the court for keeping us hostage in the house for weeks. During their stay in the police station, mother and daughter had confessed that they'd poisoned us through the special family dinner we always had every 2 months. I remembered when Steph suggested it. I'd been so happy that our family would have a tradition, unknowing that it was a way to kill us slowly. Well, since Steph, who was now paralyzed and moved with the help of a wheelchair as a result of the gun wound on her leg, was the main orchestrator of everything, she was given a life sentence with hard labor. Her daughter got 10 years and 2 years community service after release. Sasha's wound hadn't healed properly, so she had to support herself with crutches. My dad and I recovered and began working again. I took over as the vice president. We didn't forget about what Steph and Sasha did. but we never talked about it. 8 months later, we heard about Sasha's death. Apparently, her wound had gotten seriously infected and refused to heal. The leg had to be amputated, but Sasha died 2 months later after the amputated leg also got infected. We also heard that Steph lost her sanity after hearing the news. She'd lost everything. She started acting like she was mad, talking to herself while walking. Not long after, people noticed and she was taken to a mental care facility, where she still stays. Regardless, my dad and I were happy, and that was all that mattered. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment. My brother didn't seem to be listening. I saw the rage in his eyes, which made me wonder what suddenly made him angry.
How dare you raise your voice at your brother? When did you get so disrespectful? Why? Is it because of that stupid job? Is that why you think you can now speak to him without manners?
I was shocked to hear her say that. But before I could speak, my brother pounced on me. I was beaten up mercilessly while my mom sat there, watching him and even encouraging him to hit me more. When he was done, leaving me crying and in pain, he stormed into my room, grabbed my computer, and walked back out. Before my eyes, he smashed my computer on the floor and stomped on the screen continuously. I was both physically and emotionally hurt. He dared me to continue the job and promised to do even more if I did. Both him and my mother left me on the floor, writhing in pain. Hi there. My name's Steph, and I'm 26 years old. I lived with my mom and elder brother until I was kicked out at age 23 because they hated that I was working from home. My father passed away during my junior school years. He was my best friend and the only one I could be completely honest with. My mom and I were never close with each other. She loved my brother more than me and never hesitated to show it. My brother was born just 1 year and 6 months before me, but my mom made me respect him as though he was 10 years older. I wasn't complaining though. I was respectful. However, my brother wasn't. While growing up, he made me feel his hatred for me every time. He would hit me at the slightest provocation, and of course, my mom would support him. It was unfortunate that no one was there to help. If my dad was alive, he wouldn't have done that to me. Not only did my mom see no wrong in him always hitting and mistreating me, she also gave him complete control over my life, according to my mom. Boys are wiser, and had always wanted 2 boys, not a girl that I turned out to be. My brother and I went to the same high school, and he was always watching me. He would slap me in front of my friends if he walked past and I didn't greet him. If he ever caught me talking to a boy, he would beat up both of us and accuse me of being in a relationship with the boy. My brother was huge and intimidating, so no one could report him. At one point, everyone refused to associate with me. My friends avoided me, and boys at school stopped talking to me for fear of getting beaten up by my brother. I was forced into being an introvert, despite the fact that I loved being around people and talking to them. I wasn't allowed to go to school parties or even throw birthday parties at home. I mean, even if I was allowed, there was no one who would attend. I didn't have friends anymore. Meanwhile, my brother was allowed to do whatever he wanted. Whenever he wanted to throw a party at home, my mom would even help him with the arrangements and welcome his friends warmly. Time flew, and I grew up. My brother and mom skipped my high school graduation and college graduation because my brother chose to have parties at home on those 2 important days of my life. But I didn't think about it. In fact, I loved that they didn't attend. I was able to speak to a few people and even get their numbers. After graduation, usually people search for jobs in physical companies, but I was forced to roam the internet for jobs when my brother refused to let me attend 2 job interviews. I was sure I would get those jobs, but I didn't have a chance because of my brother and my mom, who never saw anything wrong in his actions. Luckily, I was able to get a job online as a marketer for a well-known brand. The pay was decent, and I was sure I'd be able to make something good out of my life with it. I had no plans to let my mom and brother make me rot away in my room. I worked hard enough, but that meant spending more time in front of my computer screen. I didn't mind, though. I had no friends, so I barely had anywhere to go. Now, life would have been better if my mom and brother didn't see something bad in me spending too much time in front of my computer screen.
Being in your room all day playing with your computer doesn't sit well with us. Whatever it is that you're doing, we demand you quit.
I allowed everything and obeyed whatever law they created in the past. But I wasn't going to let them make me quit my job. I'm sorry, but I can't do that. I can't quit my job simply because it doesn't sit well with you both. There was no way I was going to quit. I fed myself with that job and did every other thing. My mom had stopped feeding me ever since she came to know that I was working, but she continued feeding my brother despite the fact that he also had a job. My brother further went on to emphasize that my job was stupid, and that working online was simply time wasting and not a normal job. Time wasting? How can you say that when you made me get a job online due to your strictness? You made me miss interviews for no reason. Mom doesn't feed me anymore. How do you expect me to live? Huh? My brother didn't seem to be listening. I saw the rage in his eyes, which made me wonder what suddenly made him angry.
How dare you raise your voice at your brother? When did you get so disrespectful? Why? Is it because of that stupid job? Is that why you think you can now speak to him without manners?
I was shocked to hear her say that. But before I could speak, my brother pounced on me. I was beaten up mercilessly while my mom sat there, watching him and even encouraging him to hit me more. When he was done, leaving me crying and in pain, he stormed into my room, grabbed my computer, and walked back out. Before my eyes, he smashed my computer on the floor and stomped on the screen continuously. I was both physically and emotionally hurt. He dared me to continue the job and promised to do even more if I did. Both him and my mother left me on the floor, writhing in pain. I was able to call my boss and requested a week break from work. Fortunately, she agreed. I was able to get a new computer and also have the injuries I sustained from the beating treated. Afterward, I visited my grandparents. I'd had enough of my mother's and brother's dictation. I needed help to free myself, and I was going to go any length to get that freedom. My grandparents were wealthy. In fact, ever since my dad's death, they'd been continuously sending us money. My brother and mother hardly let me see them. The last time I'd seen them was over 7 years ago. When they saw me with the bandages around my head, hands, and ankles, and the other little bruises, they were shocked. In tears, I told them about how my family had been treating me since the death of my father. When they heard how my brother broke my computer, they were livid. They immediately went with me to confront my mother and brother.
She's a lady. If I don't discipline her, she's gonna start living a wayward life. And who are you to say that? A seer? I'm embarrassed to even stand here to speak to you. You think hitting her is going to make her live a different life than the one you stupidly think she'd live without the maltreatment? And you let him do this to your daughter? Shouldn't mothers protect their daughters? How can you sit and watch this happen?
Her brother is older than her and is wiser. I'm happy I left her in his care.
I can't believe this. You're both insane.
Well, me thinking they would change and respect my grandparents was just me being delusional. After my grandparents warned them against their behaviors and left, my brother and mom collectively designed my skin with fresh wounds. They both beat me up until I passed out before they left me. I was unconscious for over an hour. When I finally woke up, I was exhausted and in so much pain. I managed to grab my phone and call an ambulance after calling my grandmother. The ambulance came right before I slipped into unconsciousness again. I was at the hospital for 1 week before finally getting discharged. I had to use a wheelchair for 3 months because the injury they caused on my back was a serious one. After I got discharged, my grandparents wanted to arrest my mom and brother, but I begged them not to. They treated me very unfairly, but I didn't want them going to jail because of me. In anger, my grandparents cut ties with them and told them to never show their faces to me again. In response to that, my brother and mother stormed my grandparents' house. They were going to beat them up, but the guards were quick to rush in after hearing my screams. They dragged my mother and brother out of the house. My grandparents refused to let that slide. They got restraining orders on them, and I felt safe afterward. Once I was out of the wheelchair, my grandfather resigned from his company and put me in charge. I was shocked, but they told me it was what I deserved. I managed the company well. In less than a year, I'd impressed my grandparents and taken the company to a higher level. I was impressed with myself. Unfortunately, after 2 years, I lost my grandfather. My grandmother followed him 6 months later, unable to survive without her husband. It left me so sad and devastated as I'd gotten used to having them around. After their funeral, their will was read. They'd willed the company, their house, and all the money they had to me. As for my mom and brother, they got 2 old bikes which my grandfather used when he was younger. They were mad.
How can they do this to us? This is unfair. I won't take it.
You must divide your share between yourself and your brother. He's older than you, so keep it in mind that you're giving him the bigger share.
I found it amusing how she could afford to be so shamelessly entitled to my inheritance after everything they did to me. Well, I refused to give him anything. My grandparents had given the properties to me, and I wasn't sharing with anyone. Shockingly, my mom and brother sued me for withholding my brother's inheritance. Well, the case was dismissed because they clearly weren't granted anything more than the 2 bikes in my grandparents' will. Since they couldn't get through that, they tried to break into my house to kill me and take everything afterward. Luck was on my side, as they both fell while trying to enter my compound on the fence and sustained severe back injuries while trying to break into my house. I knew they'd planned to kill me because both of them had knives. I didn't report to the police. No. In fact, I took them to the hospital. But I found the papers at their house and sold the house and everything in it while they were at the hospital. With the money, I paid their bills and took care of them. They both thought I was using my money.
I would thank you, but I don't see any reason to. I don't care if you treat us. When we're discharged, you must go ahead with the property division.
I said nothing and only smiled. While they were still at the hospital, I bought a house in London out of the money I inherited. I did that because I knew my brother and mother would try finding me if they got out of the hospital and realized that they didn't have a house anymore. Afterward, I sold my grandparents' house to a government official, knowing my parents would not be able to try fighting him for the house. On the day they got discharged, I left the country. Oh, did I forget to say I'd also cleared their bank accounts and used the money to buy unnecessary expensive toys, which I told the hospital to give to them on their way out? That evening after they got discharged, their call came in. My brother was in tears and my brother was begging for my help. I let them know that I was behind everything and hung up before they could say anything. Afterward, I destroyed the SIM card. Imagining the shock on their faces made me burst out laughing. Honestly, I wish I'd delayed a little to at least see their reactions. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more stories. One day, my phone accidentally rang out loud in Mrs. Agatha's class. When I checked, it was my mom. I became afraid because my mom never called me during class. I had a blind and crippled mother. Leaving her alone daily was bad enough. I tried to excuse myself to answer the call, but Mrs. Agatha wasn't having it.
Is your mother stupid to not know that you'll be in class now? Does being blind and crippled make a person senseless? If you answer that call, I'll make sure you get expelled.
Ma'am, it's important. My mom would never call during school hours if it wasn't. Please, ma'am, I beg of you to let me answer it. She stood up and began walking toward me. Before I could process anything, she slapped me harshly. I screamed and held the affected face in my hand.
How dare you talk back to me? Who do you think you are to try arguing with me?
She took my phone from me and smashed it on the floor, even going as far as using her foot to stomp on it. I couldn't stop crying as I returned to my seat. When I got home that day, I received news that my mom had been hospitalized. Apparently, she fell from the top of the stairs and was taken to the hospital by our neighbor. My college was known for being one of the best and having students being in high places. However, Mrs. Agatha, the head professor, ruled the school with an iron fist. Hi, my name's Lily, and I'm 29 years old. In my college days, I belonged in a group of fellow classmates. We were just 5. Maxwell, Annie, Sasha, Jason, and myself. We weren't the best students, but we weren't bothered. Don't get me wrong. We studied very hard and never missed classes. But some students seemed to be intellectually better than us, so they bagged the top 5 while we were following behind them. We were good students. We never broke the school rules and always ensured to be good to each other and the other students. Unfortunately, Mrs. Agatha seemed to have a huge problem with us. I mean, she was also a menace to other students, but ours was worse. It seemed as though she held a special hatred for us. If we'd offended her at any point, her actions might have been justified, but we never did. No one dated to offend Mrs. Agatha. She was just plain evil. We were all gathered in the lecture hall one day for a major class. It was a rainy day, but the sound of the students conversing covered the sound of the rain by half. We were all talking and having fun while waiting for Mrs. Agatha to speak. That is, until Sasha stumbled in, drenched to the bone. She had been held back by the rain while returning from her part-time job and had barely made it to class on time. Sasha was an orphan, and she didn't have nice, extended families. Hence, she did everything all by herself. The teachers at school knew about all of her part-time jobs. She was also a scholarship student, and that helped her out a lot. Dr. Evans, our professor who also knew about Sasha, gestured for her to take a seat and catch up on the lecture later. But Mrs. Agatha, who was auditing the class that day, was having none of it.
The orphan has no right to sit down yet.
Sasha stood there, shivering from the cold and anger. She hated when people addressed her as an orphan in a mocking way.
How dare you come to class like this? Do you not care about the standards here?
Sasha was still trembling. She tried to explain herself, but she couldn't. Her voice was shaky.
Leave this room immediately. You're disrupting the class.
We all sat in stunned silence as Sasha hurried out of the room. It was a moment of collective discomfort, watching our friend being treated that way. As if that wasn't enough, the next day, Mrs. Agatha took her anger out on us all in the group. In front of the crowd watching, she reprimanded us, making it clear that we were all guilty by association. We had failed to maintain the standards, and were collectively scolded, our morale further bruised. Another time, during a debate competition that we had prepared for weeks, Mrs. Agatha was one of the judges. Our group had put in countless hours of work, rehearsing and refining our arguments. We were nervous but hopeful as we presented our case. After our presentation, the other judges praised us. Seemingly impressed, Mrs. Agatha's feedback was nothing close to impressed.
Your performance was weak and lacked originality. Are the 5 of you dumb? Were you all too busy being stupid that you forgot that you were supposed to prepare intensively for this?
We were too lost for words. She picked apart each of us, targeting our weaknesses and attacking us with them. We sat there, our faces burning with humiliation as we tried to hold back our frustration. The mixed reactions from the audience only added to our discomfort. Eventually, she made us lose the debate and punished us for losing. Another time, we had organized a charity event as part of a class project. We poured our hearts into it, working long hours to make it a success. Mrs. Agatha attended, and instead of offering encouragement, she criticized every minor flaw. She mocked our efforts in front of the attendees, dismissing the event as amateurish and a waste of resources. Her comments overshadowed the positive impact we had hoped to make. One day, my phone accidentally rang out loud in Mrs. Agatha's class. When I checked, it was my mom. I became afraid because my mom never called me during class. I had a blind and crippled mother. Leaving her alone daily was bad enough. I tried to excuse myself to answer the call, but Mrs. Agatha wasn't having it.
Is your mother stupid to not know that you'll be in class now? Does being blind and crippled make a person senseless? If you answer that call, I'll make sure you get expelled.
Ma'am, it's important. My mom would never call during school hours if it wasn't. Please, ma'am, I beg of you to let me answer it. She stood up and began walking toward me. Before I could process anything, she slapped me harshly. I screamed and held the affected face in my hand.
How dare you talk back to me? Who do you think you are to try arguing with me?
She took my phone from me and smashed it on the floor, even going as far as using her foot to stomp on it. I couldn't stop crying as I returned to my seat. When I got home that day, I received news that my mom had been hospitalized. Apparently, she fell from the top of the stairs and was taken to the hospital by our neighbor. It was him who'd called me. Time passed, and Mrs. Agatha never changed her behavior, especially toward us. There were also times when she tried to put us against each other. The woman was seriously bent on destroying our friendship. One of those times was a period we had a fight. There was an argument, and before it got too heated, we'd angrily departed from each other. Somehow, Mrs. Agatha had come to know about the argument. She called us into her office one after the other.
I heard Maxwell saying he feels disgusted being friends with an orphan like you, Sasha. He also complained that your habitual lateness is the reason they often fail their tasks.
Sasha had cried out of the office because she felt so bad about hearing what Maxwell had allegedly said. She did the same to the members of the group, including me.
Lily, I can't believe you talk bad about me behind my back. You even swore to kill me first when you get a gun. Don't you think that's being rude and cruel?
I'd never said that about Mrs. Agatha. I hated her, yes, but not to the point of planning to kill her. I didn't even have any plans of getting a gun.
Annie told me everything you always say about me, and I must confess, you've got a lot of horrible things in that head of yours. Just so you know, none of those in your silly friend group likes you. In fact, they're planning to kick you out.
I was vulnerable at the time, so I believed her words. I decided to stay away from my friends. I wanted to make it easier for them to drop me. When I saw that the group was back and they were still not talking to me, my heart bled. I cried so much for days because I thought I'd lost my best friends. Until one day, when they approached me.
Please, forgive us if we offended you. After our fight, Mrs. Agatha had called us all and told us lies about each other. When we all figured out that she lied, we didn't know how to come to you, especially because you were also avoiding us. Please, come back to the group.
I burst into tears and hugged them. That day, my hatred for Mrs. Agatha increased. I wanted to find every way to get back at the woman. Luckily, my friend group were also eager to get revenge on her.
She's been too bad to us. If we don't stop her, I'm afraid she's going to do more. Trying to put us against each other for the 4th time is bad enough already.
We all agreed and began to think of a way to get revenge against her and get her off our backs. We finally got a plan. The plan was audacious. It involved a series of meticulously coordinated pranks designed not just to disrupt, but to humiliate Mrs. Agatha in front of everyone. Our target was the spring fair, the school's biggest event, where Mrs. Agatha was sure to be present. On the day of the spring fair, the school was alive with excitement. Mrs. Agatha, in her usual stern manner, roamed the event, oblivious to what was about to come. As the fair reached its peak, we began our plan. Firstly, a hidden mechanism triggered an explosion of harmless but eye-catching confetti. It was a minor distraction, but it set the tone for what was to come. Just as she stood at the front of the hall, Maxwell popped 2 balloons above her head, causing blue color to rain down on her, turning her hair and body into a shimmering spectacle. The students' attention was immediately turned to her as she screamed. They couldn't hold their laughter, and neither could we. Just as she was about to speak, she got called on the stage to give her tradition speak. We saw the frustration on her eyes and got gingered for the next revenge. Just as she got on the stage, Sasha began walking on the microphone. Everybody went silent as an embarrassing video began playing. It was one of her harsh reprimands, where she'd told an asthmatic student to die already.
You should just die already. I can't have you breathing all heavily and running out of class because of your silly disease.
Gasps were heard in the audience. Another video of her suggesting how I wanted to be killed was played.
Since you're nothing but a failure, shouldn't you start making suicide plans? You could stand in the middle of the road and get killed by a car or even jump into the sea.
Everyone gasped again. Mrs. Agatha couldn't face the crowd. Before anyone could speak, we unveiled a giant inflatable caricature of Mrs. Agatha. It depicted her in a grotesque, exaggerated form, complete with a wicked grin and exaggerated features. The caricature was paraded around the fairgrounds, and students laughed loudly as it wobbled and danced, a symbol of Mrs. Agatha's fall from power. Furious, Mrs. Agatha tried to regain control. As she stomped towards the mic, she slipped on a slick patch of fake mud that we had carefully placed there. The fall was dramatic, and Agatha's pride was left in tatters as she lay sprawled on the ground, covered in the fake mud and surrounded by the loud and unending laughter of the crowd. The school board, having witnessed the full extent of our revolt and Mrs. Agatha's disgrace, had no choice but to take action. An immediate investigation was launched, revealing a pattern of abuse and misconduct that left no doubt about Mrs. Agatha's unfitness for her role. She was swiftly removed from her position, her reputation irrevocably damaged. We also heard that she was divorced by her husband, who took a large portion of her money, leaving her broke. On top of that, she had to pay child support. Her children eventually abandoned her after enduring years of mistreatment. In the end, she was left all alone with no family by her side. She fled the state because people mocked her whenever they saw her. She moved to a different city in search of work, but it was difficult because her videos were online, and she couldn't find employment. Eventually, she found a job at a care home, taking care of the elderly. She lived in a tiny house with 3 cats, struggling to survive on the little she earned. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.